We are told that the Apollo program ended with Apollo 17 in 1972. They said the budget was cut. They said the public lost interest. They lied. NASA had built 3 more Saturn V rockets. Hardware worth billions of dollars doesn't just go to a museum, it goes underground. In December 1974, 2 years after the last mission, a rocket launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base under the cover of a massive storm. There was no media, no live broadcast. This was Apollo 18. Its destination wasn't the Sea of Tranquility. It was the SchröDinger Basin, on the far side of the moon, the side that never faces Earth, the side where screams cannot be heard. Why did they go back in secret? Because of a photograph. During the orbit of Apollo 15, command module, pilot Al Worden snapped a series of high-resolution photos of the dark side. Most showed craters, but frame 482 showed something else. A spire, a jagged, vertical structure rising 3 miles high from the lunar surface. It cast a shadow that was geometrically perfect. Nature doesn't build straight lines in a vacuum. The Department of Defense classified the image immediately. They called it the monolith. They needed to know if it was Russian or if it was ancient. Apollo 18 was sent to knock on the door. The crew of Apollo 18 didn't exist on paper. Commander John Jax Anderson, Pilot Vance, and Lunar Module, Pilot Morris. They were scrubbed from the Air Force records. They weren't trained for exploration, they were trained for salvage. Their suits were different, reinforced with Kevlar weave, designed for hostile environments. Before the launch, Commander Anderson recorded a tape for his wife. "He didn't say, 'I love you,'" he said. "If I don't come back, don't let them open the casket." He knew this wasn't a scientific mission. It was a reconnaissance mission into enemy territory, an enemy that had been dead for 1 billion years. The 3-day journey to the moon is usually filled with chatter between Houston and the crew. But Apollo 18 flew in passive radio silence. No telemetry, no updates. Inside the capsule, the mood was heavy. Morris reported seeing flashes of light outside the window. Moon pigeons, they called them, but these weren't debris. They were moving against the trajectory. On day 2, the onboard Geiger counter spiked. Radiation levels surged, then vanished. Something had scanned them. Anderson noted in the log, "It feels like we are being watched, not from the ship, but from the dark." Orbit insertion happened on December 25th, Christmas Day. As the command module slipped behind the moon, Earth sank below the horizon. This is the loneliest moment in human experience. You are cut off from all radio contact with humanity. For 45 minutes, you are the only living things in the universe. But as they flew over the SchröDinger Basin, Vance looked out the window. "Commander," he whispered, "look at the lights." Below them, in the eternal darkness of the crater, there were faint, blue bioluminescent pulses. It looked like a city grid, but a city that had been bombed into silence eons ago. Anderson and Morris boarded the lunar module, call sign Altair. They initiated the descent. The target landing zone was 5 miles from the monolith. As they got lower, the scale of the structure became apparent. It wasn't just a spire, it was a ventilation tower, a chimney sticking out of the lunar crust. The radar altimeter malfunctioned, spinning wildly. The computer screamed 1202A alarm. Anderson took manual control. He landed the Altair blind, kicking up a storm of grey dust. When the engine cut, the silence returned. But it wasn't quiet. The hull of the ship creaked, contracting in the cold. And the dust didn't settle. It hovered around the ship like a swarm of insects. "Crew!" They suited up for the first EVA. When Anderson stepped off the ladder, he didn't say a poetic line. He said, "The ground is soft, it feels like ash." They began the trek toward the structure. The gravity on the moon is 1/6 of Earth's, making movement dreamlike. But the landscape here was wrong. The rocks were sharp, like broken glass, and everywhere there were trenches, long, straight grooves cut into the regolith. Morris took a sample of the soil. "It's sticky," he reported. The lunar dust clung to their suits, coating the white fabric in a dark charcoal gray. It wasn't just dust, it was magnetic. It was attracted to them. It took 2 hours to hike to the spire. Up close, the material was unlike anything on Earth. It wasn't rock, and it wasn't metal. It felt like cold, hardened plastic. At the base of the tower, they found the entrance, a triangular breach 30 feet high. It hadn't been opened, it had been blasted open. There were scorch marks around the frame. Someone had fought a war here. Anderson shone his flashlight into the void. The beam didn't hit a back wall. It extended into a massive, hollow chamber that went down deep into the moon's core. "Houston," Anderson said, forgetting the radio silence. "We are not the first ones here." They stepped inside. The telemetry on their suits spiked. The internal pressure of the cave was higher than the vacuum outside. There was a thin, tenuous atmosphere, argon and neon. The sound of their breathing changed. The acoustics were damp. Morris walked toward a pile of debris. It looked like wreckage, twisted metal, shattered glass. But mixed in with the wreckage were suits. Not NASA suits. They were bulky, organic-looking carapace armors. And they were empty. Whatever had worn them had either left or disintegrated. Anderson checked his oxygen. "We have 30 minutes, he said. "Grab what you can and let's go." He didn't like the way the blue mist on the floor was swirling around his boots. As they turned to leave, Morris stopped. He pointed his light at the ground. "Jack," he said, his voice trembling. "Look." Beside their own ribbed boot prints, there was another track. It was large, three-toed, and deep, and it was fresh. The dust hadn't settled into it yet. This meant two things. First, something was walking around in here. Second, it was here right now. A sudden static screech burst through their headsets. It wasn't interference, it was a pattern. Click, click, scree. Anderson grabbed Morris. "Move, now!" They abandoned the samples and turned back toward the light of the entrance. But the entrance seemed further away than before. Running in low gravity is a nightmare. You feel like you are moving in slow motion. You jump and you float, helpless, for seconds before landing. Anderson checked his rearview mirror on his wrist. In the long shadow of the spire, something detached itself from the wall. It moved with a skittering, spider-like gait. It was fast. It navigated the boulders effortlessly. It wasn't chasing them to catch them. It was herding them. "Don't look back!" Anderson yelled. They reached the rover. They didn't bother strapping in. Anderson gunned the electric engine, kicking up a rooster tail of moon dust. They were racing for the Altair. But the creature had already flanked them. They threw themselves through the small square hatch of the Altair. Anderson slammed the door and spun the locking wheel. Clang! Hiss! The cabin repressurized with a blast of oxygen. They collapsed on the floor, gasping. The silence of the vacuum was replaced by the hum of the ship's life support. "Did you see it?" Morris wheezed, his face pale behind the visor. It had too many legs. Anderson didn't answer. He was watching the oxygen gauge. They had burned a lot of air running back. "We are secure," Anderson said, trying to believe it. "Nothing can get through that hull." But then a soft sound came from above them. Thump. The lunar module is not a tank. It is a fragile spacecraft made of aluminum sheets as thin as 2 layers of aluminum foil. It was built to stop micrometeoroids, not monsters. Scritch, scratch, scratch. The sound moved across the roof. Something heavy was walking directly over their heads. They could see the insulation foil depression with each step. Morris drew his survival knife. A useless gesture against the vacuum of space, but it was all he had. "It's looking for a way in," he whispered. The creature was testing the hull, tapping on the antennas, scratching at the rendezvous radar. It wasn't attacking blindly, it was probing for weakness. After 10 minutes, the scratching stopped. Anderson signaled to take off their helmets. As the seals popped, a strange smell filled the tiny cabin. NASA astronauts have always described the smell of moon dust as spent gunpowder or wet ashes. But here, in the dark side crater, it smelled metallic, like copper blood. Their white suits were coated in the dark gray regolith. They tried to brush it off, but it stuck to the fabric like iron filings to a magnet. Anderson wiped his glove on his pants. The dust didn't just smear, it seemed to absorb into the weave. "Get out of the suits," Anderson ordered. "Put them in the jettison bag." Sealed tight, they stripped down to their flight coveralls and shoved the dirty suits into the containment bag. But as Morris went to zip it shut, he froze. "Jack," he said, "the dust!" Under the harsh LED cabin lights, the gray powder was moving. It wasn't drifting in the air, it was crawling across the fabric. The particles were organizing themselves, clumping together to form small, sharp spikes. It looked like ferrofluid reacting to a magnet. But there was no magnet. The dust itself was alive, a nanoscopic colony of silicon-based organisms. They hadn't just walked on the moon's surface, they had walked on a living carpet, and now they had brought it inside their home. The air filtration system whirred loudly, trying to scrub the floating particles. But it was too late. Morris started to cough. At first, it was a dry hack. Then, it became a violent spasm that bent him double. He retched, spitting into his hand. It wasn't phlegm, it was a black, gritty sludge. He had inhaled the dust during the desuiting. The organisms were now in his lungs, reacting to the moisture and heat of his body. "It burns," Morris gasped, clutching his chest. "It feels like glass in my throat." Anderson grabbed the medical kit, but what could aspirin do against a silicon parasite? Morris's veins began to darken, turning a spiderweb black under his skin. Anderson scrambled to the comms panel. "Altair to Casper. Vance, do you copy? We have a medical emergency. Repeat, medical emergency." Static answered him. Not the white noise of empty space, but that rhythmic click-click scree. The command module. Casper was orbiting overhead, but something was jamming the signal. The spire outside wasn't just a ventilation shaft, it was a jammer. They were cut off. Anderson looked out the small triangular window. The landscape outside was pitch black, lit only by the faint starlight. But in the distance, the bioluminescent city grid was getting brighter. It was waking up, and the creature on the roof had returned with friends. A shadow fell over the window. Anderson recoiled as a hand slammed against the thick quartz glass. It had 3 fingers, long and jointed like a spider crab, ending in obsidian claws. Then a face pressed against the pane. It had no eyes. Just a smooth, pale surface with sensory pits where a nose should be. It didn't need eyes. It sensed heat. It sensed Morris's fever. The creature tapped on the glass. Tap, tap, tap! It was testing the integrity. Behind it, Anderson saw movement in the shadows. Dozens of them. They were swarming the lander like ants on a sugar cube. "They know we're in here," Morris whispered, blood trickling from his nose. The scratching became tearing. The creatures were ripping through the gold foil insulation and the micrometeoroid shield. The aluminum hull groaned under the assault. A sharp claw punched through the wall near the life support system, just inches from Anderson's head. Air hissed out of the puncture. Anderson grabbed a sealant gun and fired a patch over the hole. "We can't stay here!" he yelled. "They're gonna peel this can open like a banana!" Morris was slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow. The black veins had reached his neck. "Leave me," Morris said. "I'm changing." Anderson ignored him. He strapped Morris into the standing harness. He began the emergency ascent sequence. They were leaving early. There was no time for a checklist. Anderson armed the ascent engine. He didn't wait for the navigation computer to align. He punched the fires button. Explosive bolts fired, severing the ascent stage from the landing legs. The hypergolic engine ignited instantly. Boom! The Altair shot up from the surface like a bullet. The sudden G-force pinned them to the floor. Outside, the creatures clinging to the hull were blasted away by the exhaust, tumbling into the vacuum. But not all of them. As the ship climbed through the black sky, Anderson heard a thumping sound on the side. One of them was still holding on to the ladder. They broke orbit. The black sky turned into a field of stars as they rose high enough to see the universe again. The creature on the ladder couldn't hold on against the acceleration. It froze solid and drifted away into the void. Anderson exhaled. "We made it," he said. "We're rendezvousing with Vance." He turned to check on Morris. Morris was quiet. His head hung low. "Morris?" Anderson asked. Morris lifted his head. His visor was open. His eyes were gone, replaced by smooth, pale skin. His hand, strapped to the control stick, had fused with the glove. The fingers were elongating, snapping the bones, reshaping into 3 black claws. The infection wasn't killing him. It was rewriting him. To the eyes of Pilot Vance aboard the command module, Casper, the approaching lander, looked like a wreck. The gold foil was shredded. The hull was dented. It looked like it had been chewed on. "Altair, you are looking a little rough," Vance radioed. "Confirm status." Anderson hesitated. He looked at Morris, who was currently convulsing silently against the wall, strapped in but twitching. If Anderson told the truth, Vance wouldn't let them dock, and Anderson wanted to go home. "We had a rough landing, Casper," Anderson lied. "But we are green. Prepare for hard dock." He was bringing a biological weapon aboard the lifeboat. Docking 2 spacecraft moving at 3,000 miles per hour requires surgical precision. Usually, the computer handles it. But Morris, thrashing in his seat, kicked the manual control stick. The Altair lurched. "Watch your drift," Vance shouted over the loop. Anderson fought the controls, sweat stinging his eyes. "Stop moving!" he screamed at Morris. Morris stopped. He turned his head slowly. His faceplate was fogged up with black condensation. He made a sound, a wet, clicking noise that didn't sound like a human throat. Anderson ignored it and fired the thrusters. The docking probe slid into the drogue. Clunk! Click! Capture latches engaged. They were connected. Vance floated into the docking tunnel to open the hatch. He turned the pressure equalization valve. Normally, you hear the hiss of air. This time, he heard a gurgle. He swung the heavy door open. Immediately, a cloud of dark dust floated out, suspended in zero gravity. It shimmered in the tunnel light. Then the smell hit him. Not the metallic smell of the moon, but the rot of something organic. "Jesus, Jack, what did you guys step in?" Vance asked, coughing. Anderson floated through the tunnel, pushing past Vance violently. "Close the hatch behind us," Anderson ordered. "Seal off the Altair. Now!" But Morris was floating right behind him. They were all inside the command module. The cabin was cramped, filled with the three men and the floating dust. Anderson stripped off his gloves, his hands shaking. "Morris, get your helmet off," Vance said, reaching for his friend. Morris hung in the air, limp. His white suit was stained gray. The visor was opaque with black slime. Vance grabbed the locking ring of the helmet. "Don't touch him!" Anderson yelled. Too late. Vance twisted the helmet. Click! Hiss! He pulled it off. A sphere of black, gelatinous blood floated out, wobbling in the air, and inside the neck ring, Morris's head was gone, or rather, it had changed into something else. It wasn't a head anymore. The human flesh had split open like a husk. Emerging from the neck stump was a cluster of obsidian mandibles and multiple, milky white eyes. The dust hadn't just killed Morris, it had used his biomass as raw material to build a new form. A lava stage of the things they saw on the surface. Vance screamed, kicking off the wall to get away. The thing inside the suit screeched, that same high-pitched static sound. It wasn't dead weight anymore. The suit arm snapped up, grabbing Vance's leg. The grip was crushing. It pulled Vance in, the mandibles clicking, ready to feed. Fighting in zero gravity is a nightmare of physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When Vance tried to push the monster away, he just pushed himself backward into the instrument panel. The Morris thing thrashed, its movements jerky and unnatural. It tried to bite through Vance's flight suit. Anderson grabbed the only weapon at hand, a heavy steel fire extinguisher. He launched himself off the ceiling, swinging the tank like a club. Clang! He hit the creature's helmet ring. The force sent all three of them spinning into a tangled ball of limbs and machinery. The cabin lights flickered as they smashed into the circuit breakers. Contrary to public belief, astronauts on secret missions do carry weapons. In the survival kit beneath the flares was a standard issue, .38 caliber revolver. Anderson ripped the Velcro tab open and grabbed the gun. He spun in the air, trying to get a clear shot. "Move, Vance!" he shouted. Vance kicked the monster in the chest and floated toward the tunnel. The creature hissed, turning its attention to Anderson. It unzipped its own spacesuit, not with hands, but by bursting through the chest fabric. 6 spidery legs exploded out of Morris's ribcage. It wasn't wearing the suit, it was hatching from it. Anderson fired. Bang! The sound was deafening in the small tin can. The bullet struck the creature in the center of its mass, spraying black ichor into the air. The recoil sent Anderson slamming back against the navigation computer. The creature shrieked, letting go of the wall. It was wounded, but not dead. The bullet had passed through it and ricocheted off the titanium hull. A warning alarm blared. "Hull integrity compromised," the computer monotone stated. They hadn't punctured the skin, but they were close. Anderson leveled the gun again. "Open the hatch, Vance!" he yelled. "Open the tunnel hatch." It was a desperate plan. Vance threw the tunnel hatch open. The creature, disoriented by the gunshot, flailed in the air. Anderson used his legs to launch himself like a torpedo, slamming his boots into the creature's chest. The impact sent the beast tumbling backward through the docking ring and back into the damaged lunar module. Anderson grabbed the hatch handle. The creature lunged, its claw catching the edge of the door frame. Anderson slammed the heavy steel door on its limb. Crunch! The claw severed. He spun the locking wheel. Clank, clank, sealed. The monster was trapped in the Altair, but they were still docked to it. Vance didn't wait for the order. He hit the jettison switch. Explosive charges fired around the docking ring. The command module! Casper shuddered as it pushed away from the infected lander. Through the window, they watched the Altair drift away into the darkness. Inside the lander's window, they could see the shape of Morris, or what used to be Morris, thrashing against the glass, trying to get back to them. It was over, or so they thought. Anderson floated in the cabin, breathing hard. He looked at his hand. There was a scratch on his glove, a tiny tear in the fabric where the creature had grabbed him, and underneath, a small gray smudge on his skin. After jettisoning Morris into the void, a heavy silence fell over the capsule. Houston was still jammed. They had 72 hours of empty space between them and Earth. Anderson and Vance didn't speak. They knew they had just murdered their friend. But Vance had a darker fear growing in his gut. He had seen how Anderson was cradling his left arm, hiding his glove. The air in the ship began to flee thick. The carbon dioxide scrubbers were working, yet the air smelled strange. Not like sweat, but like ozone and copper. It smelled like the inside of an old battery. There were two men trapped in a closet, falling through the dark, and one of them was lying. While Vance checked the navigation sextant, Anderson drifted down to the equipment bay. He rolled up his sleeve and peeled back a strip of duct tape he had used as a makeshift bandage. The scratch wasn't healing. It was expanding. The wound was jet black, like tar, and it was moving. Black veins were spreading out from the center like a spiderweb, crawling up his forearm under the skin. Anderson didn't feel pain. He felt a strange, numbing coldness, like ice water flowing toward his heart. He quickly retaped the wound. He knew the protocol. If Vance saw this, he would be obligated to open the airlock and flush Anderson out too. Paranoia spreads faster than any virus in a confined space. Vance noticed the tick. He saw Anderson constantly scratching his left wrist. He noticed that Anderson's sweat looked wrong. It was slightly gray, cloudy. "How's the arm, Jack?" Vance asked casually. Anderson jumped. "Fine, just a sprain," he lied. Vance glanced at the heavy torque wrench strapped to the wall. The trust was gone. They weren't partners anymore, they were inmates. Vance decided right then that he wouldn't sleep. As long as Anderson was awake, Vance would keep his eyes open. He gripped the wrench, his knuckles white. Exhaustion eventually won. Anderson drifted into a fitful sleep. But it wasn't restful. He dreamt he was back on the surface. In the dream, he stood naked on the lunar regolith. He breathed in the vacuum, but it didn't kill him. Instead, he inhaled the black dust. The massive spire loomed over him, pulsating with a blue light. It wasn't speaking with words, but with a hive mind frequency. "We are coming! We are coming!" Anderson woke up screaming. A string of thick, black saliva floated from his mouth. He quickly wiped it away before Vance could see, but he could still hear the buzzing in his head. The signal was no longer outside. It was broadcasting from inside his own skull. Anderson floated to the window, pretending to check the star tracker. He caught his reflection in the dark glass. For a split second, he didn't recognize himself. His eyes, they were wrong. The pupils weren't round. They had stretched horizontally, becoming rectangular slots, like the eyes of an octopus or a goat. He blinked rapidly, rubbing his face. When he looked again, they were round. Was it a hallucination? Or was his DNA being rewritten in real time? He ran his tongue over his teeth. They felt loose, as if something sharper was pushing them out from the gums. He was evolving. On day 2, the master alarm blared. CO2, hitch. The environmental control system was failing. Vance floated to the lower bay and ripped open the maintenance panel. The lithium hydroxide canisters designed to scrub carbon dioxide were clogged, but not with dust. They were choked with a thick, gray fungal growth. The infection from Anderson was airborne now, feeding on the filters. It attacks machinery just as effectively as biology. "We have 12 hours of breathable air," Vance said, tossing the ruined filter aside. They were racing the clock. If they didn't hit the atmosphere soon, they would suffocate before the infection even finished the job. Vance snapped. He couldn't take the lying anymore. He blocked Anderson's path to the cockpit. "Show me your hand, Jack," he ordered. His voice was shaking, but his grip on the heavy maglite was firm. Anderson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're almost home, Vance. Let it go." Vance raised the flashlight like a club. "I said, show me the damn hand." "I saw you hiding the gauze." Anderson slowly put his hand in his pocket, his expression going blank. Vance flinched, thinking he was going for the gun. The air in the capsule crackled with tension. It was a standoff at 25,000 miles per hour. Anderson didn't pull the gun. He lunged. He grabbed Vance by the throat with his left hand, the infected hand. The strength was impossible. He lifted Vance off the floor and slammed him against the bulkhead. Vance gasped, clawing at the hand, but it felt like iron. "You don't understand," Anderson whispered. His voice sounded layered, two tones speaking at once. "They gave us a gift. No more pain, no more death." Vance kicked Anderson in the face, breaking his nose. Anderson didn't even flinch. His skin ripped, but there was no blood, just gray tissue underneath. He wasn't Jack anymore. He was a vessel. The fight was ended by physics. The command module hit the upper atmosphere. Interface. Suddenly, gravity returned with a vengeance. The deceleration force slammed both men into their couches. 4 Gs. 5 Gs. It felt like an elephant sitting on their chests. They couldn't lift their arms to fight. Anderson lay pinned in his seat, laughing through his broken nose. His black teeth were fully visible now. "We are home," he wheezed. Vance struggled to reach the abort handle, but his arms were too heavy. They were locked in a falling bullet, burning a path through the sky. Re-entry blackout. A sheath of plasma hot enough to melt steel enveloped the ship. All radio contact was cut. Inside, the temperature began to spike. While Vance sweated, Anderson started to scream. But it wasn't fear. It was agony. The alien parasites inside him couldn't handle the heat. His skin began to bubble and blister. The high heat was boiling the infection in his veins. He thrashed against the G-forces, clawing at his own face. Vance watched in horror, praying that the heat shield would fail and incinerate them both. He didn't want to land. He knew that if this thing touched the ocean, the world was over. At 24,000 feet, the barometric switches triggered. The drogue parachutes fired. The capsule jerked violently, snapping back and forth like a pendulum. Inside, Vance gasped as fresh oxygen flooded the cabin from the relief valve. But Anderson didn't move. He was slumped forward in his harness, his skin charred and peeling from the heat of re-entry. The screaming had stopped. Vance reached over and checked for a pulse. Anderson's wrist felt hard, calcified. There was a pulse, but it was incredibly slow. Thump! Wait, 10 seconds! Thump! He wasn't dead. He was dormant. The heat hadn't killed the parasite. It had forced it to hibernate to protect the host. Splashdown occurred at E900 hours, 200 miles south of American Samoa. The impact was hard. The capsule hit the waves and immediately flipped upside down, a position NASA calls stable 2. For 10 minutes, Vance hung upside down in his straps, staring at the dark green water covering the windows. He was disoriented and terrified. He looked at Anderson. In the dim light, he saw something moving under Anderson's flight suit. The skin on his neck was rippling. The hibernation was ending. The cooling effect of the ocean water was waking it up. Vance grabbed the radio. Recovery. 1. This is Casper. Do not open the hatch. I repeat, biohazard. Do not open the hatch. The Navy recovery team didn't hear him. The radio blackout was still lifting, and the signal was garbled. 3 frogmen jumped from the Sea King helicopter. They swam to the capsule and attached a flotation collar to flip it upright. One of the divers, Lieutenant Miller, peered through the hatch window to check on the crew. He recoiled, giving a thumbs-down signal to the helicopter. He didn't see 2 astronauts waving. He saw Vance screaming, and next to him, a figure that looked like it was covered in black tar. Miller assumed it was burns from a fire. He initiated the emergency extraction protocol. They were opening the can. The hatch blew open. Fresh, salty Pacific air rushed into the cabin. Vance scrambled out, flailing. "Get back!" he screamed at the divers. "Seal it back up." The divers, thinking he was suffering from space psychosis, grabbed him. They forced him into the big, biological isolation garment, a standard procedure for Apollo missions, intended to stop moon germs. They zipped him in. Then they went for Anderson. They pulled him out on a litter. Anderson was limp. His face was covered in a biocontainment mask, hiding the damage. To the cameras on the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, it looked like a standard rescue of an injured hero. They had no idea they were hoisting a biological bomb onto the ship. The helicopter touched down on the deck of the USS Hornet. The band was playing Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean. Thousands of sailors were cheering. Vance watched them from the window of the helicopter, tears streaming down his face. "You're all dead," he whispered. "You just don't know it yet." They were moved directly into the Mobile Quarantine Facility, MQF, a modified Airstream trailer sitting on the hangar deck. Vance was locked in the main room. But Anderson was taken separately. The flight surgeon, Dr. Ellis, ordered him to be taken to the ship's sick bay for immediate trauma care. This was the fatal mistake. They separated the witnesses. Down in the bowels of the ship, Anderson was wheeled into sick bay. The orderlies noticed the smell-rotting meat and ozone. One young sailor saw Anderson's hand slip off the side of the gurney. He froze. It wasn't a hand. The fingers were fused together, forming a hard, chitinous point. "Doc, look at his hand," the sailor stammered. "Dr. Ellis, a veteran surgeon, didn't stop. It's severe burn trauma." Fusion of the digits. Keep moving. They entered the operating theater and sealed the doors. Dr. Ellis prepped for surgery. He thought he was going to treat burns. He was about to perform the first autopsy on an extraterrestrial life form. Dr. Ellis cut away the flight suit. Anderson's chest was a map of black veins. "I've never seen necrosis this fast," Ellis muttered. He made the Y incision to open the chest cavity. He expected blood. He braced for a hemorrhage. But when the scalpel parted the skin, nothing bled. The tissue was dry, gray, and fibrous. It looked like the inside of a wasp's nest. A thick, black ichor oozed slowly from the cut. Dr. Ellis stepped back, dropping the scalpel. "What the hell is this?" he asked. The nurse pointed at the open chest. "Doctor, the lungs! They're moving!" Anderson was hollow. His heart, his lungs, his stomach, they had been consumed. In their place was a dense black webbing. It was a cocoon. The infection had used his body as an incubator to grow something larger. In the center of the chest cavity, a sac pulsed rhythmically. Thump, thump. It was mimicking a heartbeat, but it was too fast. Dr. Ellis reached for the phone on the wall to call the bridge. "Get the captain!" he shouted. "We have a contamination breach." As he dialed, the sac in Anderson's chest split open. A cloud of gray spores burst into the room, instantly filling the ventilation ducts. Dr. Ellis inhaled the spores first. He dropped the phone. He clutched his throat, his eyes bulging. The transformation in Anderson had taken 3 days. In Dr. Ellis, it took 3 seconds. The spores had evolved. They were learning how to rewrite human biology faster. Ellis fell to his knees, retching black slime. When he stood up, he wasn't Dr. Ellis anymore. He grabbed the surgical bone saw from the tray. The nurse backed against the door, screaming. Ellis turned on the saw. The high-pitched whine of the motor was the last thing heard on the sickbay audio recordings. The alarm sounded throughout the USS Hornet. "General quarters! This is not a drill. CBR threat in Sector 4. The captain, realizing the biohazard, ordered a lockdown. Heavy steel blast doors slammed shut, sealing off the lower decks. But ships share air. The spores moved through the HVAC system. Sailors in the mess hall, the engine room, and the bridge started coughing. Back in the mobile quarantine facility on the hangar deck, Vance watched through the window. He saw sailors running past, wiping black sludge from their mouths. He sat down on his bunk and closed his eyes. He was the only safe man on the ship, sealed inside his glass cage, watching the world die outside. The lungs of the ship, the ventilation system, became its worst enemy. The spores released from Dr. Ellis's body didn't settle, they traveled. Pumped through the ducts, the black dust reached the mess hall, the engine room, and the sleeping quarters within minutes. Sailors eating their lunch smelled something odd, like rotting meat and copper. Then the coughing started. It wasn't a gradual sickness, it was immediate. Hundreds of men bent over their trays, hacking up black mucus. They clawed at their throats as the spores took root in their lungs, expanding rapidly, suffocating them from the inside out. Half the crew was infected before the general quarters alarm even finished ringing. On the bridge, Captain Doyle tried to radio Pacific Command in Hawaii. "Mayday! We have a biological breach!" he shouted. But the radio operator didn't answer. Doyle turned around. The operator had fused to his chair, his skin melting into the vinyl, becoming one with the station. Doyle tried to let go of his microphone, but he couldn't. His own hand had begun to bond with the plastic. The infection didn't distinguish between biology and machinery. It consumed everything. Doyle watched in horror as the ship drifted off course. The USS Hornet was no longer under human control. It was a ghost ship, drifting aimlessly in the Pacific. On the hangar deck, Vance sat inside the mobile quarantine facility, MQF. It was the only airtight environment on the ship with its own independent scrubber. He looked out the small window. It was like being in an aquarium at the bottom of hell. His rescuers, the men who had pulled him from the ocean, were now throwing themselves against the trailer. Their faces were gone, replaced by smooth, pale tissue and clicking mandibles. They banged on the glass, smearing black slime across the pane. Vance retreated to the back of the trailer, clutching a scalpel he had found in the medical kit. He knew the glass wouldn't hold forever. At 1400 hours, the heartbeat of the ship stopped. The engineers below deck had succumbed to the infection. Without anyone to tend the boilers, the pressure dropped. The turbines spun down. The USS Hornet slowed to a halt. The wake behind the ship vanished, leaving it bobbing silently in the swell. Down in the engine room, the infected crew didn't move. They stood perfectly still in the dark, like statues. They were entering a hibernation state, waiting for the ship to drift to land. They didn't need to drive the ship. The ocean currents would deliver them to the coast of California in 3 days. In Washington, the silence from the Hornet was deafening. The Pacific Command had lost contact. Satellite imagery showed the carrier dead in the water, drifting. In a sub-basement of the Pentagon, a specialized team gathered. They knew about the moon mission. They knew about the risk. Admiral Thomas Maurer picked up the red phone. He didn't ask for a rescue mission. He asked for a containment assessment. "If that ship reaches San Francisco," the analyst told him, "we are looking at a 90% casualty rate for the North American continent within a week." The decision was made in under 5 minutes. It wasn't a rescue operation anymore, it was a sterilization. President Ford was briefed, but he didn't sign the order. The CIA director did. It was labeled Operation Clean Slate. They couldn't just bomb the ship. Debris might wash ashore. They needed to vaporize it or sink it so deep that the pressure would crush the biology. A nuclear attack submarine, the USS Scamp, was already shadowing the recovery fleet. The captain of the sub received the coded message. He verified it twice. His orders were to sink the flagship of his own navy. There was no hesitation. In the Cold War, you followed orders even when they were insane. The USS Scamp flooded tubes 1 and 2, firing point procedures, the weapons officer stated calmly. Match bearings, shoot. 2 Mark 48 torpedoes ejected from the tubes. They weren't nuclear. That would draw too much attention. They were high-explosive conventional warheads set to detonate directly under the keel of the carrier. This technique, called breaking the back, snaps the ship in half. Above the water, the Hornet sat silent. Inside the quarantine trailer, Vance saw a flash of movement in the water through the porthole. He knew what it was. He didn't run. He just sat down on his bunk and waited. The impact was catastrophic. The first torpedo detonated amidships, lifting the 30,000-ton vessel out of the water. The keel snapped with a sound like a gunshot that could be heard for miles. The ship broke in two. Fire engulfed the flight deck, incinerating the infected crew who were wandering the topside. The quarantine trailer, strapped to the hangar deck, was torn loose. Vance felt a moment of weightlessness as the trailer slid off the tilting deck and plunged into the burning ocean. The water rushed in, instant and crushing. The fire burned the surface, but the deep water claimed the wreckage. The Hornet sank rapidly, dragging its cursed cargo down to the abyssal plain 3 miles deep. As the wreckage descended, the water pressure increased. The infected bodies, the spores, the black webs, they were all compressed. At that depth, biology collapses. The quarantine trailer imploded at 2,000 feet, killing Vance instantly. It was a mercy. The ocean floor became the final containment vessel. The extreme cold and pressure put the silicon organisms back into stasis. They weren't destroyed, but they were imprisoned once again. The Pacific Ocean had finished the job that the vacuum of space couldn't. The next day, the world woke up to a tragedy. President Ford announced that the recovery ship had been lost in a freak cyclonic storm. A rogue wave had capsized the vessel. There were funerals. There were medals given to empty coffins. The families wept, never knowing that their sons hadn't drowned. They had been transformed. The Apollo program was officially cancelled. The blueprints for the Saturn V were destroyed, and NASA implemented a new rule: no missions to the dark side. We put a flag on the front porch, but we never dared to open the back door again. You might be thinking, that's a terrifying story, but it's just a movie script. Is it? The story of Apollo 18 is officially a myth, but the anomalies surrounding the real Apollo missions are a matter of public record. We are now going to leave the reenactment and look at the cold, hard facts. We are going to examine why NASA suddenly cancelled 3 fully funded missions, why they claim to have accidentally erased the most important videotapes in human history, and why, to this day, there are hundreds of pounds of moon rocks missing from the vaults at the Johnson Space Center. They aren't lost, they were removed. Between 1970 and 2010, over 500 moon rocks listed in NASA's inventory simply vanished. Some were stolen by interns, others were lost in the mail. In 2002, an intern named Thad Roberts stole a safe full of rocks. He didn't try to sell them to a collector, he spread them on a hotel bed and had sex on them. It sounds ridiculous, but look deeper. When the FBI recovered the rocks, they were immediately sealed away. Not returned to display, sealed. Conspiracy theorists believe that these specific rocks showed signs of activity, that they weren't just minerals, but dormant spores. Maybe the thefts were actually cover-ups to get dangerous samples out of the public eye. Let's talk about Apollo 17, the last official mission. Astronaut Harrison Schmitt, a geologist, made a shocking discovery at Shorty Crater. He kicked the gray regolith, and underneath, the ground was orange. Not red clay, but bright, neon orange. "It looks like oxidation," he yelled over the radio. "But that's impossible." Rust requires oxygen and water, neither of which exist on the moon. NASA explained it away as volcanic glass beads. But biological analysts have pointed out that certain terrestrial fungi turn orange when exposed to a vacuum. Was Schmitt looking at volcanic glass? Or was he looking at a massive fungal colony living just inches beneath the gray dust? This is the most suspicious fact of all. NASA admits that they erased the original, high-quality slow-scan TV tapes of the Apollo 11 moonwalk. They claim it was a shortage of magnetic tapes in the early 80s, so they reused them to record satellite data. Think about that. The most important event in human history, the footage that proves we went there, and they taped over it to save a few dollars? It's an insult to our intelligence. Unless the original tape showed something they didn't want us to see in high definition. The grainy, ghostly footage we saw on TV was filtered. What was filtered out? For Apollo 11, 12, and 14, the astronauts were put into strict 21-day quarantine. NASA was terrified of moon plagues. They built the Lunar Receiving Laboratory specifically to contain alien biology. But starting with Apollo 15, they just stopped. They claimed the moon was sterile. But how could they know that for sure after only visiting 3 tiny spots? It's like landing in the Sahara Desert, seeing no tigers, and declaring the entire Earth tiger-free. Did they stop the quarantine because they were safe? Or did they stop it because they realized the quarantine didn't work? Maybe they realized that once the dust is in the cabin, everyone is already infected. Every astronaut who went to the moon reported the same phenomenon, the flashes. Even with their eyes closed, trying to sleep, they saw bright streaks of light zipping across their vision. NASA calls them cosmic rays, high-energy particles hitting the retina. But during Apollo 16, Charlie Duke described them as having structure. Some looked like splashes, others looked like lines. If these were just particles, the pattern should be random. But some astronauts reported seeing them in sync. Imagine trying to sleep in the void, and every time you close your eyes, you see the silhouettes of things moving inside your own eyeballs. It's not just astronauts. For centuries, astronomers on Earth have reported TLP, transient lunar phenomena. Short-lived lights, mists, or color changes on the lunar surface. In 1963, astronomers at the Lowell Observatory saw massive red glowing spots near the Aristarchus crater. They lasted for 20 minutes. NASA suggests it's escaping gas, but gas doesn't glow red unless it's ionized or burning. And there is no oxygen to burn. So what are those lights? Are they mining operations? Are they signals? Or is it the bioluminescence of the massive fungal colonies venting into the vacuum, just like we saw in the SchröDinger Basin? In 1994, the Department of Defense launched the Clementine mission. It wasn't NASA, it was the military. Its job was to map the moon in multispectral wavelengths. Clementine sent back 1.8 million images. But look at the map of the South Pole. There are sections that have been deliberately blurred or smudged. One image, famously known as the Zeeman anomaly, shows a rectangular object that is miles wide. The smear tool was used to hide it. Why does the military care about moon rocks? Unless they were looking for a strategic outpost or a weapon. Ken Johnston was a manager at NASA's Data and Photo Control Department. He claims that after the Apollo missions, he was ordered to destroy thousands of photos. He didn't destroy all of them. He kept a few. In his personal archive, there are prints that show things NASA airbrushed out: domes, towers, bridges. He says the astronauts were told not to talk about what they saw during the radio blackouts. When he went public in 2007, he was fired from his position at JPL. Why fire a man for showing fake photos? You only fire someone if the photos are real and they broke a non-disclosure agreement. We went to the moon 6 times in 3 years. We had plans for moon bases, Mars missions, and nuclear rockets. And then, in 1972, we just stopped. We had the technology, we had the money, but we quit. It's like Columbus sailing to America, finding gold, and then burning his ships and never returning. It makes no sense. Unless we were warned off. Unless we found out that the moon isn't a dead rock, but a sleeping hive. And the only way to stay safe was to tiptoe away and never make noise in the backyard again. After 50 years of silence, we have decided to go back. The Artemis program. NASA claims it's for science, to build a base to prepare for Mars. But look at the landing sites. They are targeting the lunar South Pole, the permanent shadows. They say it's for water ice, but we know better. We are returning because we have forgotten the fear. The generation that saw the lost tapes is gone. A new generation of arrogant billionaires and politicians believes they can conquer the void. They are building a gateway station. They are building a doorbell. And they are about to ring it. While America hesitated, China acted. In 2019, the Chang'e 4 mission became the first in human history to soft land on the far side of the moon. They landed in the von Karman crater. The official photos show a flat, empty dust bowl, but leaked reports from the Beijing Aerospace Control Center tell a different story. Within hours of landing, the rover's biological experiment, a canister containing cotton seeds, sprouted. Then it died instantly. Not from cold, but from radiation spikes that shouldn't exist. The rover's ground-penetrating radar picked up massive hollow tunnels just 40 meters below the surface. They parked on top of a roof. In 2021, the Chinese rover Yuqiu-2 spotted something on the horizon. A perfect cube. The media called it the Mystery Hut. For weeks the rover drove towards it. The world watched. Then, suddenly, the Chinese space agency released a photo saying it was just a rock shaped like a rabbit. Case closed. But look at the rock. The resolution is suspiciously lower than the previous photos. The edges are blurred. Did it really turn out to be a rock, or did the rover get close enough to trigger a defense mechanism? Remember, camouflage is the first trait of a predator. Maybe the hut didn't disappear. Maybe it just closed its eyes. It's not just governments anymore. SpaceX, Blue Origin, private corporations are racing to the moon. They see it as a mine, a gas station, real estate. They are sending unshielded tourists into a quarantine zone. Imagine a commercial flight landing in the SchröDinger Basin. No military protocols, no biocontainment, just civilians taking selfies with the black dust. It is the perfect vector for infection. One contaminated tourist suit bringing a sample back to a private airfield in Texas, and the Andromeda strain scenario becomes a reality. We are selling tickets to our own funeral. Why are we so obsessed with the moon? Helium. 3. An isotope rare on Earth but abundant on the lunar surface. It promises clean, limitless fusion energy. But ask yourself, why is it there? It's almost too perfect, like a lure, like cheese in a mousetrap. What if the helium-3 isn't a natural resource? What if it's the waste product of the machinery inside the moon? Or worse, what if it's the bait placed there to draw a young, technological civilization out of their cradle and into the dark? We are scrambling for the prize, ignoring the shadow of the steel bar hanging over our heads. During Apollo 12, NASA deliberately crashed a lunar module ascent stage into the moon to test seismic sensors. The result terrified the scientists. The moon rang like a bell. For an hour, solid rock doesn't ring, hollow metal spheres ring. This led to the spaceship moon theory. The idea that the moon isn't a natural satellite, but an artificial construct towed into orbit eons ago. An observation post. If this is true, then the craters aren't impact scars, they are camouflage. And the man in the moon isn't a face, it's the warden looking down at the prison yard. And we are the inmates. This is the final piece of the puzzle. We have tracked the anomaly across the elements. Fire, the Blackwood Asylum. Water, the Sentinel Lighthouse. Earth, the Black Creek Mine. Ice, the White Tomb in Antarctica. And now, void, the Lunar Paradox. These aren't separate incidents. They are a security system. The Earth is a vault. The moon is the lock. By going there, by scratching the surface, we have started to turn the key. The infection in the mine, the sleepers in the ice, they are all reacting to the signal from above. The moon controls the tides, yes, but it also controls the awakening. There is an ancient Gnostic theory that is even more terrifying than aliens. They believed the moon was a soul trap, a cosmic recycling center. When we die, our energy goes to the light, the white light of the moon. There, it is wiped clean and sent back. A perpetual farm for consciousness. If this is true, then the entities we encountered, the shadow people, the doppelgangers, the infected astronauts, they are the maintenance crew. They ensure the machinery keeps turning. We aren't just food for their biology, we are batteries for their machine. And we just tried to break the generator. Go outside tonight, look at the full moon. It looks peaceful, doesn't it? A silent guardian. But grab a telescope, look at the edges, look at the shadows in the Tycho crater. Are they moving? Or is it just atmospheric distortion? The crew of Apollo 18 found out the truth, and they paid for it with their humanity. The moon is not dead, it is waiting. It is watching us grow, watching us build rockets, watching us get fat and technologically advanced. It is waiting for the harvest. And judging by the number of rockets we are launching, the harvest season is about to begin. This concludes the Lunar Paradox file, and with it, our investigation into the dark corners of this planet and its satellite is complete. You now hold the truth. The fire, the water, the earth, the ice, and the void. Do not let these files be forgotten. Archive them. Share them. Because the only weapon we have against the dark is the light of awareness. Stay safe. Stay grounded. And whatever you do, don't let the dust in. Sound of a radio cutting to static, then a whisper, We are here.